For some analysis, let's turn to Ramesh Thakur. Professor Thakur is a former Assistant Secretary-General of the United Nations. He's now the Director of the Centre for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament at the Australian National University's Asia-Pacific College of Diplomacy. He's previously worked very closely with the former UN Chief Kofi Annan, who, as we heard, has been delivering his latest findings on Syria. Professor Thakur, thank you for joining us on The World. I'd like to return to Syria in a moment, but first, we've heard a lot of aid agencies and politicians here make a very strong link between Australia's aid program and our worthiness to get a seat on the UN Security Council. So what does it mean now that the government has decided to postpone and delay our commitments to those Millennium Development Goals?
I'd be sceptical that that would have any significant impact on our campaign for an elected seat on the Security Council. I think the case for aid has to be made on its own terms. A long-standing goal internationally that developed countries have accepted is that aid should work out at 0.7% of GDP. Ours, as you mentioned in the news broadcast, is around 0.35. We've committed to increase it to 0.5, which is still well short of the 0.7%. But that is important in its own right. I'm not sure it's politically wise, and I don't think it's accurate to link it to the campaign for Security Council election.
Why do you think then we see that strong link being made?
Well, there seems to be a myth that we can bribe our way onto the Security Council. I think if we succeed, and I hope we do, it will be based on what we can offer, on our other attributes, and on the fact that we are progressively increasing our aid budget and aiming to be, as was mentioned, the sixth largest aid donor. We are not going to be in a position ever in the foreseeable future to outrank the European Union, which is the world's biggest aid donor. And if it was on that basis, then we might as well forget it.
Does that then put us in a position further back than Finland and Luxembourg, who are our competitors for those seats on the UN Security Council, because they have that standing in the European Union?
In general terms, it does, not in terms of deferring our increase by 1 year. I don't think that will have really any significant effect. A much more important factor, which I'm sure they have been exploiting in the campaign, is the publicly known position that there is not bipartisan agreement and support for the candidacy within Australia.
Insight into the sort of artful diplomacy that needs to take place and that Australia needs to participate in behind the scenes to make this campaign come off, to get a seat on the UN Security Council?
Well, I think the fact that we are the 12th biggest economy, that we've survived pretty well, that we have combined European political heritage and values with the dynamism of the Asia-Pacific region, that we have a tradition of an activist middle power foreign policy, that we have many ideas to improve the quality of global governance, that we contribute efficiently and effectively to a range of international UN and other multilateral peace operations, the fact that we pay our dues in full and on time, and we are a handful of countries to do that, the fact that it's been 27 years since we were last on the Security Council, when on any objective reckoning we should be there every 10 to 15 years. All these factors are going to play a much bigger role. Our disadvantage is that because of a historical hangover, we belong to a group that's called West European and others, rather than to a new grouping in a reconfigured geographical system, which would locate us in the Asia-Pacific, where really we belong. Because we belong in the European group, it means we are always competing against someone from Europe, and they have, to start with, the support of the 27 European countries.
I'd like to turn now to Syria. Kofi Annan, as you know, has been providing a briefing to the UN saying this could be the last chance to stabilise Syria. Do you share that view?
Yes, I think so. I think there's a real risk that if both sides continue to violate the ceasefire agreements, that they will descend into all-out civil war. And as Mr. Annan said, you know, it's time to give peace a chance, and it's time to give the people a break.
Is there room for tougher sanctions here? Is that what's going to make the Bashar al-Assad regime yield more?
We don't know how vulnerable they are to tougher sanctions, but in any case, I think they know that they have the backing of the Chinese and the Russians, who for a mix of principled and commercial and geopolitical reasons, have indicated that they're not going to support any tougher sanctions, not the least because they fear that they might find themselves on the path to a Libyan-style intervention, which the results of which they're not very happy with.
As you indicate, the UN is caught in a difficult position, isn't it? Because it's very difficult to entertain the thought of the Bashar al-Assad regime being completely overthrown and replaced by an unknown.
Well, we don't want to end up with what we had in Iraq, where we overthrew Saddam Hussein and only then thought, what next? And the price, and the very heavy price of that, was paid principally by the Iraqis. So I think there's all sorts of doubts and uncertainties and a very grave consciousness that there is no humanitarian situation so grave that it cannot in fact be made worse by an outside intervention. So yes, I think everyone agrees that it's a very unpleasant regime. Everyone condemns the atrocities that they clearly have perpetrated on their people, and that is by no means justified. The difficulty comes in trying to work our way through as to where we go from here and what is a realistic alternative for the future. That's where the Annan plan has been for the past month the only real game in town. It's good that the Chinese and the Russians came behind that. But again, if you look at Annan's comments, he is, although not putting equal blame on both sides, he is pointing out that there have been violations from both sides. And the Chinese and the Russians keep insisting that you have to have an internally led dialogue and resolution of the crisis as an internal power struggle. It's not simply a humanitarian crisis.
Right, Ramesh Thakur, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us on The World.
You're welcome.